r/AskReddit. Pediatricians, what's the strangest behavior you've seen in a kid? Another one. Not a pediatrician, but while I was at the pediatrician, after doing a testicular self-exam, yes, sex ed teaching abstinence is good for something, I discovered a bulge that shouldn't be there. Go to the ped, he takes a look and confirms that, no, I did not have 3 balls, but was diagnosed with varicose veins. Later actually turned out to be inguinal hernia. The initial swelling was caused by the onset of the hernia. So 15-year me, my mother, and the ped are talking about how thankfully your boy has some sense of what is and isn't supposed to be going on with his body. He said this because a mother brought her teenager in not long ago with a white blob swelling from somewhere on his member. When he walked in, she immediately said, "I think the bone is coming out." Perplexed, he asked why she thought that, and she said that's the bone that women don't have. Men have one to give their penis an erection. The one God took from Adam to make Eve. He said he had to call in a favor and have a urologist send over a pneumatic penile implant and teach this kid and mom impromptu sex ed, and had to literally show her in Genesis where it said rib not discostic bone. Come to find out the kid just had an ingrown hair or something. Both of my little brothers are severely autistic. Can't really speak or hold a convo, but they're both very intelligent. Plus I'm a respite aid worker that helps other disabled children, so I've way too many things I could share, but here's a couple. So, my youngest brother used to have a really bothersome habit of taking a single bite out of every fruit in a bowl, donut in a box, anything where you gotta reach into a pile to eat. He'd have already taken a nice chunk out of each and every one. Never would eat a whole one, treated it like a sample platter. He also had another funny habit of wanting to shove modeling clay. He carries some with him 24/7. He's an incredible sculptor, into literally everything in the house electronic. Our car used to have one of those little TVs in the back, until he put green modeling clay into the DVD slot. Also did it to the CD player as well actually. Love the guy, but damn I got frustrated when he did that to my PS2 XD. My other brother, who's a year older, has had quite a few other quirky and mildly destructive habits. He's always had a thing for movies. Whenever we used to buy DVDs or some video games, he would love to lay them all out in the house and kinda catalog them in his mind and just like admire them. Which was cool, no problem, until he decided the cement in the backyard was a better place to view them. And he also found how, when you spin them on the cement, they create a nice circular pattern. After a while we transitioned him into loving VHS tapes and still does. The dude loves thrift shopping and has a collection of around 500 of the things. Just kinda happened like that. I got plenty more stories where those came from. They're pretty funny guys sometimes. Most of those habits stopped when they became like 12 to 13. Now they have a whole new MO with stuff. But one still carries clay constantly and has around 100 original sculptures in our garage, and the other still has all his VHS tapes. Though now he's addicted to watching YouTube on his Kindle and attempting to make Amazon video purchases by stealing my credit and making his own act. Like I said, they may not be able to talk, but they sure as hell are sharp XD. Hope this was at least mildly interesting to some. Sorry for the length. Edit, UMM. Not a medical practitioner BTW, just respite work, though I'm heavily considering. This kid I went to grade school with was really weirdly obsessed with illness. If someone was not at school, like if any of the kids in our class were out sick the day before, he would approach them when they came back and go, "Hey, were you gone yesterday cause you were sick?" If you said yes, his first question always was, "Did you throw up?" Like every time. He wanted to know that first. Then if you said you didn't, he'd ask if you felt like you might, or if you thought you might later, if you were still sick. Then if you said you were fine, he would say yeah, but sometimes it seems that way, then you get really sick again later cause you were still sick. In the rare event that someone did throw up at school, he would want to know about it, know where it was, and if the janitor put the gravel stuff on the puddle or not, and cleaned it up. He would even go bug the janitors asking them about it, if he could get away with it. Someone in class's mom had a baby. This is when me, this kid and the kid whose mom had a baby were all around 5th grade, and he asked the girl whose mom just gave birth a couple weeks ago if her baby sister ever threw up. He was most obsessed with puke it seems, but crying was another one. He would ask people if they cried, if they had been sick, or recently had been injured, or make up scenarios. Would you cry if happened? Needless to say, people were freaked out by him a lot of the time. And a lot of the guys as they got older would start to mock these questions, and so he got a little less insistent on asking them, probably out of embarrassment, or he was maybe starting to outgrow it a little hopefully. But then, one year at Halloween, 7th grade, most of the class went to a Halloween party that one of the teachers and her husband threw. They had kids everywhere. They had a huge yard, would decorate it up like a graveyard, house all decked out as haunted house, and there was a small park across the street too, so kids from the school would always stop there on Halloween. That year they gave out silly string, with the rule to just use it outside. One of the guys in our class, who was a real asshole, so I wasn't approving of his behavior here, but lots of people wanted to prank the puke obsessed kid somehow. This guy goes over to the kid that asked about puking all the time. Says, "Oh dude, I feel really sick." Then goes BLEHH and proceeds to hold silly string can by his mouth and sprayed probably the whole can right in the other kid's face, coating his hair and all. Well, it's silly string, so kids who saw it laughed. But the puke kid was silent for a few long secs, with his head down and a mop of pink string on his head. Then looks up. His face is beet red, his eyes fill with tears, and he started screaming, "You are an asshole. I hate you. It isn't funny, you asshole." Like shrieked the last word of each sentence with ear-splitting volume. He rips the string off his face and hair, while the asshole kid just laughs in a halfway cocky / halfway uneasy way. Then the puke kid screeches, "I hope you fucking die," at him and charges. They start fighting, but the puke kid screaming had already alerted adults inside who quickly came running out and yanked them off of each other. The asshole kid left shortly after cockily declaring, "What a fucking weirdo, it's fucking silly string freak," while adults sternly told him not to cuss. Meanwhile, puke kid sits on the steps of the house and sobs inconsolably while one of the home meowners sat with him and tried to soothe him and figure out what happened till someone located his parents and they came to pick him up. He was so distressed and bawling that most of the story was told to the adult trying to talk to him about it by an excited / disturbed group of kids who gave all the details of the encounter, including me. The puke kid wails, "You all hate me," at one point, and we did actually feel really terrible for him by then. So there were several kids and me trying to comfort him now going, "No man, we don't. He didn't need to spray the whole can at you. He was being kind of a jerk. It's okay man, no one hates you." Puke kid went home when his parents showed in humiliation. I never knew if this kid had like a fetish for puke, an extreme phobia of puke, or a little of both. When I was maybe 6 or 7, I freaked out my parents a lot by asking them what the color dots I would see in my room at night were. They were obviously like, "WTF?" Asked all sorts of questions. I said that they were usually yellow, red, but sometimes blue, that they were tiny and fell like snow from the ceiling, but they would disappear after a while, and that I couldn't see them in the daytime or if the room had a light or lamp on. They were very concerned, but after several questions and explanations from me of what these dots looked like and what I was doing when I saw them, they figured out that what was happening was I was like halfway crossing my eyes and squinting or fuzzying up my vision at night while I was in bed trying to sleep, and the color dots falling like snow was the result of looking out in darkness with screwy vision. Like when you see spots from rubbing your eyes for a while. But I remember I didn't understand when doing this, and then the dots appearing, that the two things were connected, and my eye crossing and squinting on purpose was directly causing me to see dots. I sort of discovered that they would appear when I did this by accident, but being a dumb kid thought they were like Some kind of real thing like a little fairy or something, that I could only see that way, and that they were physical objects, but shy and would disappear if I tried to catch them, because of course as soon as I look normally and quit screwing my eyes up they'd go away. Lol. Somehow it just didn't click that it was an optical illusion I was directly causing. Haha. Still remember how concerned my parents first looked when I asked them what they were though. I thought everyone had seen them and my parents would know what they were instead of being like consult child psychology manual for color. Hallucination. I'm not a pediatrician. I was a patient actually like 7 or 8 years old. So I remember I had to go get a physical or get updated with shots or something like that. But there was one thing that I always hated and feared. Sometimes the doctor would have this little white box thing with a red corner, and in that corner there was a hole. You put the hole next to your fingernail right at the base of the nail, and then you press a button and the damn thing becomes a guillotine for the corner of your finger. It leaves your finger bleeding like crazy. It's really damn painful, and I just reject it with every fiber of my being. So, now that I think about it, I think the visit was for a physical, because they had me in just my underwear. She did everything that she needed to do, and I was fine. Then she pulls out the little white box. I panicked. Few minutes later they have to call another doctors, and this is a local pediatric office so the other doctors are just some sweat semi-old ladies. They all had to get around me, hold me down as I'm screaming or kicking, and I actually ended up full force super kicking one of the doctors in the stomach, and then my doctor comes over, grabs my wrist, and uses the little white box on my thumb. All the doctors let me go and leave as I release a blood curdling screech and curl up on the little doctor table thing. Moral of the story: don't trust pediatricians and their little white guillotine boxes. Edit. The little box thing was a lancet. They use it to test blood sugar levels. Nope. None that can be sourced. My undergraduate degree is in psychology, and one of my professors brought in a guest lecturer, a psychiatrist, who worked at various mental institutions / governments, and he also had a connection to Carl Jung, although I do not remember of what exactly their connection consisted. This was the mid to late 1980s. I'm in my 50s now. He relayed a story told to him by Jung that Jung and Freud were very close early on in their relationship, but things soured quickly as Jung developed his own theories and Freud's use of drugs increased, and Freud wanted Jung to further his, Freud's, theories. This didn't make Sigmund happy, and as Jung's career began to eclipse that of his, Freud told people that at the Clark conference Jung shot at him repeatedly with a secret death ray gun that has slowly been sapping the life out of him over the years. Fast forward 15 years or so, and I'm in England in an old bookshop. I like to read and frequently pick up older books at Goodwill stores, tag sales, library sales, etc. I picked up a book about modern theories of personality development / psychology published in the 1930s, 1940s or 1950s. Most of these books are interesting to say the least, and bam, there is a story about how Freud literally fell out of his chair at the Clark University conference. He claimed that Jung was shooting him with the death ray, which is why he fell out of his chair, and he had to go back to his room to recover, and was fine the next day. I prefer to believe the visiting professor, as he said Carl Jung told him that story. The one in the book sounds a bit like fantasy, but I believe it has a basis in reality. If Jung told one professor, I bet that he told more than a few throughout his lifetime. It finally ends up being repeatedly told in psychology circles, and someone hears this version and puts it into a chapter of their book. So there you go. I'm telling something that I'm unable to source. I do find it very interesting. My mother worked as a nurse at a doctor's office some 20 years ago. Kid about 10 comes in, totally normal except his breath is absolutely fetid. Worst thing you've ever smelled. Turns out he'd stuffed a small eraser up his nose several years prior, and it had been festering in there. Thank FSM it didn't go this long, but my son had something similar happen. He has hemophilia and would get horrific nosebleeds. He was about 3 or 4, and when they started we'd roll up some tissue and stick it up his nose with a bunch hanging out. It really wouldn't stop the bleeding, but it would stop the trail of blood all over the house and down the front of his shirt. After a couple of hours they would stop. He gets clotting factor every other day and there wasn't much else we could do. Since he was a toddler we'd call it a plugger to the point where he'd walk into the room looking like he just had a visit from Oj and say, "Dad, I need a plugger." One day we are snuggling on the couch and I kept getting a whiff of death. I'm checking my shoes, pulled apart the couch looking for hidden or rotten food, have a couple toddlers around. It happens. Nothing. Finally I took a good whiff of his breath. Swamps of Dagobah. "Buddy, did you put a plugger in your nose?" He gets a big proud smile. "I did, Daddy. I had a bloody nose and I did it all by myself." When? Last week. I couldn't even see it. Finally with a flashlight and a pair of hair mastards I was able to extract it. It was brown and clotty and smelled like warm roadkill. Throwaway. Not a pediatrician, but I work in the One time this little girl, about 8 years old, came in because her mom found her in her room repeatedly scraping a pencil up and down her shin. When her mom asked her what she was doing, she replied that she was doing her math homework. Her parents said she was just acting very off. She kept denying that she had any siblings, but had 2 sisters. She also kept looking at her parents and saying, "You're not supposed to be here." She was making unnatural, prolonged, purposeful eye contact with some of the staff. She also had many scraps of paper, about index card sized, that we photocopied for her medical record. They looked like something out of a horror movie. Theirs was one that had death in large bold letters in the center, with a bunch of smaller deaths surrounding it and filling the rest of the paper. Another said, "It begins tonight. Prepare for battle on the trampoline," and one said, "I know your sisters' names and I will defeat them without any fear." It was really like a horror movie. My shift ended before she was discharged, so I don't know what happened. Edit. Remember that she had just been put on her SSRI about a week earlier and the doc thought it could be serotonin syndrome. Was a counselor at a psychiatric hospital for children in my previous career. So many of these stories sound so very familiar. One patient we had was a 9-year-old boy who had been brought in because not only was he sexually acting out in his neighborhood with the other children, but would also torture neighbor animals and frequently break into neighbors' homes just for the sake of doing it. He liked to move stuff around in their houses and then hide in the closet to watch and see their reaction. The first time he was brought to the hospital, he had been caught by the homie owner and had attempted to set the house on fire when caught by squirting lighter fluid on matches that he'd brought with him in case he was found out. One day a fellow staff member and I were asking him and the other patients what they wanted to be when they grew up. Most gave typical answers like baseball player or policeman. When it came to this kid's turn, without missing a beat he said, "I want to be a rapist." He said it with no sense of irony or shame. There's that scene in Halloween where Dr. Loomis says looking into Michael Myers' eyes that there was nothing behind them other than evil. I understood what he meant that afternoon. Not a doctor, and this is a story that's more about a parent than a kid, but I work in a state mental institution. We were the only facility in the state system that accepts children. We had a girl with us since she was about 11. We'll call her T. T would do well, get released to her mom and eventually end up back at the hospital once her behavior deteriorated. It's a vicious cycle. T's mom came to visit her one day and one of my coworkers noticed a change in T's mood after mom left. She asked T if she was okay, causing her to erupt in tears. She held out a small wad of tissues in her hand, giving it to my coworker. Concealed inside were several heads off of disposable razors. T's mom gave them to her daughter and told her to either cut herself up with them or swallow them. Mom wanted to sue the state for not properly watching her daughter. T was her last child and would be turning 18 soon. Mom told T that she either had to go through with the plan or never bother coming home, since she ain't worth nothing if she ain't getting money from the state. We eventually sent her back home to her mother, you know, who tried to get her to seriously injure herself for easy money. Apparently, mom changed her mind after she found out about T's pregnancy. I haven't seen her in about 10 to 12 months, but I think of her often. Work in the ear with the ear physicians, and we had this 8-year-old girl come in due to stepping on a glass bowl and slicing her foot open. This girl did not look 8. She was probably 5 feet 9 inches and of healthy weight, but it was really odd to see. Anyway, the mother was doing the typical part hates needles and said last time it took multiple men to hold her down to get sutures. So we numb up the area, which took a long time given she was pulling away, but all hell broke loose when we brought out the suture kit and Drive was trying to work on her. Kid was screaming so loud that multiple people came out of their rooms concerned about the noise. After an hour or so of trying to do this and only getting several sutures in, doctor is about to call it quits and sedate her, but goes in for one last try. She kicks away while he's suturing and he gets stuck with the needle. Never seen him so angry, and we ended up knocking her out for the rest. Second interesting case is a 12-year-old girl coming in due to cardiac arrest. She was diabetic and hadn't been taking her metformin and was in DKA. What was strange about her is she was morbidly obese, but not in a fat way but more rounded. Turns out she had Prader-Willi syndrome, and one of the symptoms is being insatiably attracted to food, so much so that they had to lock the cabinets shut so she wouldn't get to the food. She was mentally delayed due to the syndrome also. Unfortunately, she ended up dying that night. We never got her back. Graduating med student, but worked with kids throughout most of my life. Strangest, when I was doing my family med rotation, there was a kid coming in for a well child check, I think about 8 to 9Y/0. I'm pretty weird, so my preceptor was like, you need to see this kid, I think you'll get along. This kid was like the weirdest 8Y/0 ever, but freaking awesome. Incredibly intelligent, well spoken, talked like a 35Y/0 academic. He carried this big album/book with him everywhere of elaborate D&D campaign/story setups that he would make up and write down, so he'd have it ready when inspiration hit. I was 31 at the time, and we hit it off, talking about RPGs and literature, etc. I told him my husband was getting his PhD in sociology and this kid actually knew some of the big names in sociology without me even mentioning them. He was so excited, it seemed, to have someone who was actually interested in what he was, since his mom just kind of sat next to him nodding her head, and would then be like, I have no idea what he's talking about. All of his interests were completely self-motivated, and that kind of passion and interest is kind of rare to see in a kid when it's not shared by someone close to them. One of the reasons he sticks out in my head so much is that he talked so much about all the preparations he had done for these epic D&D campaigns he was going to have, all these stories he had written, activities he had set up, and when I asked him how often he and his friends played, he got really quiet and was like, well, I'm still looking for them. I don't really have any friends yet. But when I do, I'll be ready. I thought this kid was so inspiring, but also kind of sad he put so much time into building this world for friends he couldn't find. I expect that adolescence is probably going to be pretty difficult for him, but when he hits adulthood, this kid is going to freaking rule. I guess everything else that was strange was really rare genetic disorders and tragic psych stuff, which is much more depressing to talk about than awesomely intellectual 8Y/0 kids that are probably going to run the country someday. Dental student here. We are taught to do dentistry on kids too, so I've worked with them a bit. Little girl I brought into our dental clinic trailer was talking super happy about what we are gonna do. Paint my tooth white, do a filling, chase away the sugar bugs, remove decay, make her teeth and lips go to sleep, etc. I was pleasantly surprised, because we're used to coaxing kids into doing the treatment, and she seemed genuinely interested. She also said she wanted to be a dentist when she grows up. Now when we go to make the kid numb with the injection of anesthetic, we passively hide it from them by just keeping them focused on other things. Right before it, we put in the anesthetic gel, which makes the injection much easier usually. However, we are also taught that some kids pick up on this and know the injection comes after the gel, and they'll start looking, if not kept distracted. This little girl was so easy to work with, I let my guard down. Right after I placed the gel, she sat bolt upright in the chair, looking for the needle. She saw it on the tray, just a few feet from her. Thankfully she didn't grab it, or even reach for it, but she immediately grabbed her face protectively, and shook her head hard, meaning no, and to please not make her face go to sleep. In my mind, crap. She saw the syringe. Cover was still on it, but still, now I get reprimanded for letting her see it, and she'll probably get let go without any work done today. I figured I'd try a tactic we weren't taught. I'd just ask her. I explained simply why I want to get her numb, so she doesn't feel any sugar bugs trying to bother her teeth at all, etc. I asked if I could pretty please with sugar on top, with sugar and whipped cream and a cherry on top with rainbow sprinkles. I could tell when I was telling her how I wanted her to be comfortable and not cause her any pain. She looked a little less hesitant. I was getting through to her, so that's why I pursued. After I put on my best puppy dog eyes, I'm a guy and my version of this isn't very effective. She actually thought for a moment, then just nodded once and laid back down in the chair. I actually asked if she was sure, still kicking myself for asking, but she nodded again. I thanked her profusely and gave her all the best praise. She was an angel the rest of the act after that too. Very well behaved child. I applaud her parents. I asked her afterward how I did. She said it pinched, but no big deal. I praised her again and let her go. Not a pediatrician, but was an urban pediatric respiratory therapist. We had a kid with a rattlesnake bite, not envenomated. As we are checking him out he tells us he has the snake's body in his bag. That is when I learned from a cow walker that a snake can and will bite after it dies for about an hour. Then that is when this kid, about 8 tells us he didn't bring the head. 0. He was riding his bike, saw a rattlesnake, and tried catch it. It struck, bit, but did not inject venom. The snake ran, slithered away, but the kid hopped back on his bike and chased it down. He used the stick to cut off its head because he was angry at it. His anger at the snake for escaping being poked by a stick was particularly creepy. He smiled the whole time he talked about killing it. Wouldn't stop talking about how good it felt. Then he refused to tell anyone where the head was because he wanted to keep it. Thoughts of that kid keep me up at night sometimes. I hope he grew up to be a butcher and not a serial killer. He would be around 22 now. He was scary, and I highly doubt he got the psychiatric resources he needed in that town. Thank you so much for watching the whole video. Please leave a like and subscribe.